practice, and we have to build those kind of plans. Abstinence is a zero tolerance policy is not going to be effective in trafficking cases for a lot of reasons. And so when you're thinking about electronics, if I just talk about a cell phone, there's a gazillion different ways of doing it. One, you watch the teenager teach their parents all of the apps on the phone. They teach them how to work the phone. Two, the parents are given all of the passcodes to all of the different apps on the phone. We know they'll develop more, but that becomes a conversation. Three, they only get to use their cell phones in the living room while their parents watching them do it for 2 hours a day. Four, the computer for the home becomes a part of the kitchen rather than in the bedrooms. There's like, the world is our oyster in terms of harm reduction plans for trafficking. That's just for electronics. There's other harm reduction plans like I don't get picked up by certain people to go in cars. I can go with other people. And by the way, the trick about a harm reduction plan is that you have to build it with the kid. You have to build it with the kid, because if you don't build it with the kid, it's really an authoritative plan and there's no buy-in. So we have to build those plans with the kids. Yeah, we can talk for days about harm reduction and trafficking, and specifically with electronics, how do we get to a place where they learn how to use online safely rather than never using online again? Because it's unrealistic to think we'll have teenagers that will never be online again. So.
And there's a lot of different, through COVID, I've had, I think, more opportunities to participate on webinars regarding internet safety. And there's a lot of information out there and tools, because I think some of the challenges that we have is that in these making plans with kids and families is that families feel very ill-equipped to be able to have these conversations because they don't understand how technology works. And so they don't immerse themselves in it, and they put blinders on their eyes, and they don't know how to have these conversations. But there's a lot of resources out there, some of which I've collected, so I'm happy to people email me to send out what I have. But the ability to help coach some families through these conversations that they have to have, as well as providers, I can't stress the importance of, because what Erin is talking about is really providing an opportunity for that youth to like feel empowered to teach. And not to say that they're not going to always be forthcoming and honest about everything, but it really provides them to be a little bit more of the driver and provide them with some choices and options.
The last thing I wanted to say about that, and I saw we have another question, but the last thing I want to say about that is that you can do harm reduction in the language that you choose. So I do not ask return from run youth if they were approached by somebody that wants to trade sex. I ask them when they were approached by someone who wants to trade sex. We know that in the first 24 hours of a run, 75% of youth are approached for sex or sex acts. You don't have to ask when. You don't have to ask if, because you already know, and in your language, you can establish credibility that you understand there is risk swirling around them at all time. That's harm reduction. How many times did that person ask you to go a certain place? Not did the person ask you to go a certain place. So we have got to get with what is actually going on, and that is reducing harm by using that type of language. When you run, this is what I want you to be thinking of, and these are the people that are going to approach you, and this is what you can do to keep yourself safe. Sorry, Tracy, go ahead.
And I think to also be honest, like when we're having these conversations with kids and families, like kids are not going to be happy about this. Like they don't want to have additional restrictions. They don't understand why we are so concerned because they think they've got it and have it handled. And I think it's really important for us to really be transparent and honest with the kids that we're serving, that like part of our job is to make sure that they're safe and to include them in some of these conversations. But sometimes that means that their world gets a little bit smaller. And with regards to supervision and access, and that there's more rules around because we care about them and we want to make sure that they're safe.
Cassie, do you want me to answer the question from Karen?
Yeah, let's do that. And then we should decide if we want to do a scenario or just keep going with questions.
Sure. Um, the reason for return is complicated and individualized. It's based on the kid, but generally speaking, a trafficker is looking for a youth that has a void that the trafficker can fill. And it's a very long process. Tracy may correct me, but I can only remember one case in the last 6 years where the very first run, somebody was trafficked. It's usually a process of getting to know the youth and what's hurt about them, what has been hurt about them, how they've been taken advantage of, what they so desire, and filling those holes over time. They return because other people don't fill those holes in the same manner. And so something we've worked on really hard in Vermont is to give the case managers money, food, clothing, shelter, hotels, so that they can start filling those holes as quickly as possible for people that are in need. Because if we don't, they return back to a lifestyle where those needs are gratified really, really quickly. The trafficker is not coincidental in the grooming process. This is a purposeful and intentional attempt to prepare for that person returning home, not home, returning back to the trafficker. They have to do it every single night. They return back to the trafficker after every single sex act. The whole thing is about a return, grooming to return back to the trafficker. And so asking them to come and be in freedom and be a part of DCF where they're not getting those needs gratified really quickly is a big ask. And so they return back because their voids are being filled by the trafficker and by the lifestyle with money, power, privilege, all of those things.
I think, and most importantly, this desire and sense of being loved and wanted, and that sense of connection where everybody wants that, not just trafficking victims. Everybody wants that, and that piece is exploited. And that's a piece that we struggle with as a system at times because of workload and just volume in general. But similar to domestic violence, where there's the continued return, you know, a lot of these youth and adults, like, they feel that that person loves them and cares about them. And until, you know, that takes a lot of treatment and work in order for them to understand that that's not really what love is and what love looks like. And that is a really difficult bond to break in these situations, which for me, I think is part of what the relapse to go back is a part of.
Tracy's talking about the difference between a push-pull factor. There's push and pull that lead to return to trafficking. The love pulls on them, but returning back to a regular world where you have to deal with shame pushes on them. If you return back to a world where you're entering DCF and treatment, you have to feel the shame associated and the guilt with your decisions, and you're missing the love. And so that has been the things that we've been working really hard on with our trafficking survivors, is how to make them feel love, and also to pace the shame, to not open up all of those conversations when they come out, to pace the trauma story and the trauma narrative. Because if you ask them to tell it too quickly and in too much detail, they feel all of that shame. And also, I work really differently with my trafficking victims and survivors than I do with regular outpatient clients. I'm available to them to love them in a different way than I do a regular client, because that helps them stay. And that's part of the work, is working all of the time.
We've got a bunch of questions, so let's keep kind of rolling with these. There's a new one from Ellie. Can you see it, Erin? Do you want me to read it out?
I think Erin had one more question in there, in the one before.
I have teens that will give up sex to get the drugs they want. I'm only smiling not because sex and drugs. I'm smiling because the relationship between trafficking and drugs in Vermont is incredibly strong. And the traffickers in Vermont, and certainly nationwide, but specifically about Vermont, are using drugs to bring people into trafficking, to keep them in trafficking, and to avoid them leaving trafficking. Drugs are a mechanism that they're using to continue the process forward. And so it's really important to get understanding what opiates do to the brain, how they are used in the grooming process, all of those things. Is the return ever about self-safety? So in IPV, sometimes that is about being safer to return to the abuser, not just conflict about love peace. That's a complicated question, and I would say that their brains feel like it's a safer choice because they've been told it's a safer choice for a very long time. It's never the safer choice. And so they know that. The victims and survivors know that they're not safe in that situation, but they feel safer. And that's what's hard about the safety piece. Also, the most risky and dangerous part of coming out of trafficking is if you cooperate. And for youth, they're forced to cooperate because they're youth, and so they're watched by DCF. And they don't have the opportunity to come out of trafficking and say, I'm not cooperating, I'm not talking to any law enforcement, I'm not talking to any providers, I'm not dealing with anybody, I'm just gonna go be on my own, which is what a lot of the adult survivors say to protect themselves from a trafficker wanting to hurt them and kill them because they're cooperating. Kids can't do that. The trafficker knows that they're working with somebody. And so it's really dangerous to cooperate, and they're considering that all of the time.
I think there's also some situations, because here in Vermont, we have more cases of kids being trafficked while being in homes with their families, that they might have this perceived notion that it's safer to be with the trafficker than to be at home with their family based on what's going on there. And a lot of the times, a lot of these youth, and from what I've seen as adults, they've been involved with, they've have a lot of experience with us as a department, and so they know what happens when they tell. And it's not always good things. There's a lot of shame sometimes within families for telling. People get mad at you. You might get shunned within your own family. You might get put into foster care with strangers, and that might not be a great experience, or it could be a great experience. And being in foster care is also really difficult, and there's a stigma that's associated with it. And so I think that a lot of reasons, especially as kids they're still trying to figure out who they are and relationships, that it just adds to the complication with, I think, kids deciding to return in those situations.
And you can imagine that it's very easy to promise a kid who is in an unsafe situation, or a situation where there's no money, or a situation where their parents are not involved, a better life. And we have worked with a lot of youth that had those promises on the front end. That was the fraud, although we didn't need the fraud on the kid cases, but that was the fraud, is that they were promised a different life other than the traumatic life that they were already in their family of origin. And so that is not a hard sell for a teenager who has nothing, to be told that they're going to have a lot of material possessions and to feel like that's going to be an improvement on their life. I wanted to say, Ellie, too, that we've had a lot of conversations in Vermont about the difference between trafficking and domestic violence, trafficking and interpersonal violence. And yet, at the beginning of many of our trafficking cases, the youth and adult believes that they are the girlfriend of the trafficker. And so there are a lot of similarities and resembling of domestic violence and interpersonal violence in trafficking. And there are some differences, but we can really think about that cycle of violence and the patterns as being instructive towards why the youth are getting stuck and not able to leave. What kinds of support are available to the families of trafficking survivors to help them understand this? I wish I had more of an answer for you. We in Vermont have not yet gotten to the families. And we're just barely scratching the surface for building infrastructure and services to treat trafficking for survivors and victims. And so hopefully you all will have many suggestions for us. I see one right there that they could watch the micro learning. I will say that from working with families for a really long time, there is a period of time where the family is devastated if they're the majority of kind of families, and it's a lot to hold, it's a lot to contain. They need a lot of information, they need a lot of support, and as DCF you're going to be required to do some of that work. And so consult, and there's a lot of national resources for parents and families. So the National Human Trafficking Hotline and Polaris Project, both of them have a lot of resources for families.
And I think one of the things that we're trying to do with our limited options here is to try to build capacity within our local agencies. And what's hard about that is it feels like one more thing that's being added on for people to manage. And I think that we can individually do that on a case-by-case basis about bringing our local agencies on, providing them with some training and education so that they know what would be helpful in supporting these families, because ultimately we need those families at the table to help support and wrap around these kids to be able to hold this. And it's a lot to hold, and it's terrifying for these families. And sometimes it might feel easier for them to say, you do it, DCF, like, because it's just too scary for them to hold. And which is why, like, the importance of building a really strong team, because this is a marathon. These cases and situations last a very long time. And I think especially now during COVID and social isolation, I can certainly say I've been feeling, I'm sure other people have as well, that there's the desire to still continue to connect with people is now happening more and more online. And so for me, I worry about that risk more and more. Because you can't, it's very hard to compete with having wanting that connection piece when we all can't be together right now in person, and kids and adults are really looking for that.
The other thing I would say about services for families is that we are really working hard to choose the right people in Vermont that want to provide service for human trafficking, because the worst case scenario for a family is that they see a therapist that doesn't understand human trafficking, or a provider that doesn't understand human trafficking, and that provider tells them that they should have done better. And so what we really want to be doing is educating all of our public servants about what trafficking is, so that families have a supportive and helpful response, which is that this is awful and terrible and you wish it hadn't happened, and you can do better going forward, but you were likely doing your very best, because no parent, no family wants this to happen to their child. Cassie, do you want me to keep answering the questions?
Let's see what you guys want. So we can keep popcorning questions, or Tracy and Aaron can give you a really brief scenario and you can practice with it for a couple minutes.
I just wanted to, before we were to go into a scenario, there was a couple other ideas for safety planning that I was hoping to add into that I can do now, or we can answer more questions, whatever makes more sense.
Okay. How about, here's my proposal, and write in the chat if you disagree. We'll cover a couple more things about safety plannings. We'll do some questions, and we won't do the scenario. If you strongly object, write it in there. Okay. Hit it, Tracy.
Okay. So
you never get to say that.
So I think that I'm just going to give some examples of ideas that other teams have used when they've thought about safety planning for kids that they were really worried about, who are current victims of trafficking. Just because I just think it's helpful to have some ideas, because sometimes people have brilliant ideas that I haven't even thought about. So So I think Beckett does a really nice job of writing up safety plans in collaboration with families that people can go home with, similar to our FSP model. So I would encourage that same process in building a safety plan with kids and their family, and to determine the different levels of what you need in that moment in time for supervision. And it might be, you might need alarms on the windows and doors if you're really worried that that youth might run away. You might need 24-hour eyes on supervision. And in some situations, some families have is sleeping in the same bedroom as the youth because they were so worried that they might run. And part of that has also been a discussion with that youth around what have been their triggers around running. Why have they been running? So that there can be a plan to address each trigger, as well as who are they going to call? Kids need to have phone numbers as to who they can call for their support people when they start feeling triggered, and start having that inclination that they might run. And so that list of numbers should not just be for team members, but it should also be for some national hotline numbers. So the human trafficking hotline has a texting option that anybody can text it, which I think is a good resource for kids, because sometimes these things are hard to talk about over the phone or in person, as well as mental health crisis numbers, local advocacies, so that they have some choices as to who they're going to reach out to. And the other part of it is, I think kids really need to hear from their teams as what is it that the team needs to see in order to relax, to relax and titrate down in this higher level of supervision. And sometimes it might be that you start off with a lower level of supervision and you have to bump it up because something unsafe has happened, and then you keep on going back down. And there's this dance that goes back and forth between different levels of supervision. And there's not one size fits all. And then the last piece to it is that there has to be some psychoeducation for the caregivers around trafficking, as well as for the kids, that they need to understand and have an understanding of what is trafficking, and so that they understand the risk as to why we are so worried. But for the parents and the caregivers, so that they also understand why we are asking for this higher level of supervision. What does this look like? What are the things they need to be paying attention to, so that they can supervise appropriately?
Do you want me to answer the question about Vermont?
Yeah, I'm grabbing the links to Sarah's question. I'm getting the plans project and the other stuff, and I'll pop it in the chat.
So I will only answer the question about Vermont if you all promise to keep in mind that this is a chicken or an egg question, okay? So where is the most trafficking cases in Vermont is directly linked to where we've trained the teams to best identify it. There is a component of when you train people to identify trafficking, they identify trafficking that's been going on for thousands of years, okay? So there are hubs in Vermont, that's true. And also that's not to say that the trafficking is not going on in the other areas. So certainly Burlington and Chittenden, certainly Rutland, definitely Newport, definitely Brattleboro, Bennington, and now a lot of Barrie. And that is partly related to, we have MDTs there that are looking for trafficking and are trained up to find it, and services to support it. Is there a way to educate and train them? Over the last 5 years, we've trained about 4,100 people in the state. The task force and the steering committee, the training and outreach subcommittee has trained, 4,000 people. Yes, there's ways to train. We are training just as fast as we get requests and as fast as we can think to do it. But we're always available to train more. And we're really interested these days in training specialty groups. So we've been training religious affiliations, we've been training medical. If you think about where traffickers take their survivors and victims, or who will always see them, That's who we want to be training. So traffickers always get medical treatment for their survivors and victims. So Planned Parenthood, ERs, urgent cares, all of those places. We need to be training all of the specialty groups.
So, to go back to the data question, so part of my role is to keep track of all of the cases, all the kid cases here in Vermont. And so the top 3 district offices that have had the highest number of trafficking has been Burlington, Barry, St. Albans, and then Rutland after that. Sorry, that's the top 4. But I agree that those areas have also they have had more cases and have had more training at times.
Awesome. The other thing is, and I know this is shameless promotion, but I really believe in it. In the podcast that Tracy and Aaron recorded, they dug into the difference between red flags and risk factors, and how sometimes in trafficking they're the same, but sometimes they're different. And it might be helpful because one of the things that always happens when we have any type of training or discussion about this is people start to sit with the, oh no, I think this kiddo is being trafficked, or I'm certain this mom on my caseload is, going back and forth into the lifestyle. And when you start to think about that, Tracy is a resource to you to consult with. But B, there's a little bit more you can learn about what's the difference between a risk factor and a red flag that might give you some better ground to stand on there.
And actually, all of your kids have major risk factors for trafficking, specifically because one of the biggest risk factors is a past history of custody by state. And the second biggest risk factor is run history. So a lot of your kids have all of the risk factors. What Cassie's talking about is differentiating between, are they at risk, or has it already happened, or when will it happen?
I think another resource that we have and is that we do have 2 human trafficking case managers for the state who work with kids and adults who've been trafficked. So if you want to make a referral regarding a kid, you need to go through me about it. But if you have an adult on your caseload, you can do a direct referral to that. I try to keep track of the numbers as to how many referrals we've been making to each of those case managers. And the criteria is very low, which is good in terms of there just needs to be a risk of trafficking in order for me to make a referral for case management. And when we're thinking about kids who are 17 and a half and getting closer to adulthood, I think it's really important that we start hooking them up with adult services. And I am always hoping that we could do like a one in-person meeting with one of those case managers if you are worried about risk of trafficking or has been trafficked. And it's not about them engaging, but so that they have a face with a number of somebody who they could call if they get into a place that they just want to talk, or they're in trouble, or they need something and they need some support, that those are 2 good resources, and they're not DCF. So that's a plus.
The other thing about that is that the point at which you want to start safety planning is the point at which you think they're at risk. And so the safety planning buckets are the same, whether you're preventing or intervening, supervision and support. So you can start building a safety plan to prevent trafficking by doing the same cogs in the wheels that you're doing after trafficking. But we have to be talking about it as soon as they're at risk. And I saw a comment of somebody that's talking to teens about the risk of trafficking, and the teens don't want to talk about it. Yeah, so welcome to my entire life of talking to people about things, specifically youth, that don't want to talk about it. And that's part of the conversation, is the fact that you're going to keep showing up and keep revisiting it because you care. And when they need you, they'll think you care and that you'll keep showing up, and that will be enough for the moment. So yeah, we keep showing up and we keep caring. So for our most risky and vulnerable youth, when they get into a situation, then they'll come and find us.
I'm just looking at a comment from Juliet. You're so welcome. So we're right near the end. I'm gonna open it up either for one more question or for Aaron and Tracy to share anything that they think you need to hear before you go. I'm also gonna copy and paste the evaluation link in the chat. And it was also in the invitation for this meeting the last little thing I'm going to tell you is this is our last microlearning for the training year, because our trainings run through June. So if you liked these and you think we should do more of them, like moving forward in future years, fill out the link. Sorry, I'm very inarticulate today. Fill out the evaluation link and say that. It'll help us plan. So not only about this microlearning in particular, but about microlearnings in general. That makes sense. We made them up quickly during COVID, so we think we're going to keep moving forward with them, but we'd love some feedback. And I can also add the podcast link. Okay. It doesn't look like anyone's going to jump in with a question. So Teresa or Erin, if you want to say anything to close, you got 3 minutes.
Don't sit with these cases alone. Call, consult, build the team to meet regularly. It's a lot, I will add, it's a lot more work to do that. And like, these are not situations that you want to sit alone with. So, and thank you for this. Gets me really excited how many people are here wanting to learn about this. So.
Cassie, do you want to answer that question if the podcast is parent or older teen friendly?
Oh, yeah, I would say so. I mean, how about this? Give it a listen first yourself to just assess. The target audience is you guys. Having said that, we found that caregivers like it, community providers like it, other folks in our realm like it. So I think it would be fine, but you'll know the parent and the teens best.
And even though this won't make any of you feel better right now, the next step, one of the next steps for Vermont is to train school curriculum statewide on trafficking prevention and intervention. And we're going to work hard on that in this upcoming year. And so we know that the teens and the middle school students, and actually trafficking prevention has to start in kindergarten. We have to be talking about consent and boundaries. So that curriculum we're going to work on in 2021.
Am I unmuted? I can't tell from here. Yeah, so there's one more link I'm trying to grab. I'm just having a little slow internet lag, but if you want to wait for it, you're welcome to. Otherwise, fill out our evaluation and have a beautiful Friday. Happy
One
June.
more pitch in really quick before we hang up. Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. I jumped in.
That Lindsay and I co-chair the human trafficking work group, and we are currently working on developing a policy and practice guidance. So if you feel, we would love to have you have more workers at the table if you're able to join in that dialogue regarding the ongoing casework.
Awesome. All right, I think that's goodbye for real. I don't think I'm being silly this time. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and get to cool off somewhere. Thanks for coming by. It's good to see you.
Thank you.